The following is brought to you by VerticalVet. Rethink your GPO.
Hello, VerticalVet family. I am Dr. Ernie Ward, Chief Veterinary Officer for VerticalVet, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to another edition of Vet Med School Business Academy. And this is really some of my favorite content because we get to talk to you about the business elements of veterinary practice that can help you succeed in ways that, not just medicine will. And today's webinar is sponsored by our friends at First Financial Bank. And guys, if you aren't clued into what they can offer you, you need to definitely contact us and we will put you in touch with them because they have an entire suite of tools that can help you thrive. And let's be honest, guys, today we're going to be talking about some of the economic uncertainties that we may be facing next year, and you need to have a financial partner in your corner, and I can't think of a better group than First Financial Bank. So I want to thank them for bringing a dear friend, and you guys have seen her before. This is she's been here so many times. I feel like she's just a part of the family. But this is Dr. Schwanda Flowers, and Schwanda is a pharmacist, and today we're going to talk about how can we create a pathway to financial freedom. And we know that, so much of our stresses and the anxiety that we deal with in veterinary medicine revolve around, can we make our payments, right? Do we have enough money to survive? And Schwanda is going to share some really invaluable information for that. But if you haven't watched her before, and I encourage you to go back and check out some of our other webinars with her, Dr. Flowers is one of those people that has recognized that, practice ownership, business ownership, and how we forge those personal relationships within our businesses are really key to our success for sure. She uses this experience in ownership because she's been an owner of an independent business, pharmacy specifically, and her business planning, and she helps support all of us. So again, this is why we like to partner with companies like First Financial Bank because they've got unique individuals like Schwanda. She's been an innovative member of the pharmacy community for the past 20 years. She was a former independent pharmacy owner. She understands what it takes to be successful and to be an entrepreneur. She now actually works in academia as well, where she's been leading the way for the past 14 years, focusing on entrepreneurship, ownership, business planning, leadership, and on professional development. And I got to tell you, I can't think of a better person to talk to today. Schwanda, thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you. It is an honor to be here. I'm excited to be with you once again.
Well, a lot of times we do compare ourselves to other professions, right? And so in veterinary medicine, we compare ourselves to human physicians, right? We compare ourselves to dentists, the ophthalmologist back a long time ago for some reason. But, pharmacists are also kind of in this same little realm as us, right? Where there's a lot of corporate ownership that has occurred over the last 20 years, but independent pharmacists still do very well. Maybe just quickly, just draw some of those comparisons about why I like talking to you, because I think there's a lot to learn from independent pharmacists.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. So, I really, from my perspective, what I see is that what's happening right now in the veterinary space with corporate consolidation, a lot of our graduates from vet schools around the country going into corporate practice. It's very similar to what we saw about 15 years ago in the pharmacy space. What's interesting, though, about that is that although that happened, and there was some concern in the industry about, okay, what does this really mean for independent practitioners? What does this mean for those of us who do want to own an independent pharmacy or own our own business and really have that autonomy of practice? And what it really meant was there was still lots of opportunity. And typically what we find is that new graduates make that choice to go into the corporate environment for lots of reasons. It may be financial. I mean, it may pure and simple be financial, and nobody can fault them for that. We're graduating a lot of practitioners right now with a ton of student debt, and that's a concern. And so sometimes that offers them, some additional dollars right after graduation to be able to pay some of those student loans back. But also it offers experience. And so, once a practitioner has been able to be out, to be responsible for practicing and, kind of get their feet under them after graduating from school, because, as you remember, and I remember, that's nerve wracking, right when you get out of school and you're all of a sudden ultimately responsible for everything that happens. Once you get a little bit of experience, under your feet, you really start thinking about, okay, how do I really want to practice? What are my goals, for myself in the future as a practitioner? And that's when we find a lot of professionals start really thinking about ownership. And so we're finding exactly the same thing happening in the vet space that we saw about 10 to 15 years ago in the pharmacy space. And there's now a resurgence of these independent practices.
Yeah, and I love that. And again, when we talk to people like Schwanda, Vertical Vet Family, we're trying to bring in experiences and expertise that really precede, if you will, what's happening in our profession. Because, we used to always joke, Schwanda, that we're about 20 years behind human medicine. Well, in this realm, we're about a decade or so behind, pharmacists. And so I think there's a lot of lessons. I also really appreciate you saying that, look, whatever your first job or two is, it's not forever always, right? I mean, so learn from it, take from it what you can and understand that your life may change and that direction, certainly can take you in all sorts of paths. Well, I want to start out today kind of talking about where we are in the industry today. I mean, and you've got a bullet point here, say what's going on. I mean, there's a lot going on, and maybe just shed a little insight into the things that are impacting our ability to create financial freedom.
Yeah, I think what's going on in the industry right now is, that we have seen that the veterinary space is, what many are labeling pandemic proof, right? So we are coming out of, something that most of us have never experienced anything like this before. We have generations who are, I think going to grow up a little bit differently post COVID. But through all of those things, what we've seen is that veterinarians and vet practices, animal hospitals, emergency vet medicine have been busier and busier and busier. And so many industries found themselves in a very different situation during COVID. There were a lot of shutdowns. There were a lot of industries that really did not survive, these last couple of years. But the vet space, this whole space related to especially companion animals, has just exploded. And so, what we see going on in the industry is that's a great thing, right? So, it's positive that revenues are higher than they were pre-pandemic. We're seeing more animals. We're serving larger populations. More people have, companion animals in their home. They're paying more attention to them. We're probably taking better care of them, than we did, pre-COVID. But with that, what goes hand in hand with that is that, our practitioners and our technicians, our receptionists, all of those support personnel, they're tired. I mean, so this has been a little overwhelming, even trying to keep up with what's happened in the space. And so it's combined with, yes, there's more business, more animals, more things to do, but that's also led to some exhaustion on many levels.
Right.
And so yeah, so those go hand in hand.
Yeah, and again, it exposed a lot of sort of vulnerable aspects of practice. I think there's a lot of inefficiencies that we can improve upon. That's why I loved it at the outset when you said, hey, we saw in pharmacy as we sort of got consolidated and have different pressures, we saw opportunities. And I do think this is one of those times in life when we should say, okay, what are the lessons? We're short staffed. What can we do to improve efficiencies? And I do appreciate you also mentioning, Schwanda, that, not everybody fared as well during the pandemic as maybe we did. And I think that that's something to be really grateful for because, I mean, there are a lot of businesses that just may never come back the same.
No, you're absolutely right. So, many businesses just didn't have the reserves, and just could not bounce back after the pandemic. They couldn't get employees back. I mean, it was just a really difficult situation for a lot of small businesses around the country. And so, I think that we're very fortunate to be in spaces. For me, I am fully committed, and ingrained both in pharmacy and veterinary medicine. And so for me, I feel like it's very fortunate that I get to work with, owners, potential owners, and practitioners who are in these spaces that really did see a resurgence. And I love what you said about efficiencies and figuring out, sort of new ways to practice because of the pandemic. Then one of the things that we saw is that there were lots of things that veterinarians were doing, services that were being provided that probably they were not capitalizing on from a revenue standpoint. So they weren't charging for those telephone calls,
Right.
those telehealth visits. They weren't some of those things weren't happening. We were just providing those things to the community. And what we figured out was, okay, that's a service I'm providing that now I can generate revenue with.
Right.
And so, as I said, there were lots of wonderful lessons that came out of the pandemic, and we do need to see the positive, through some of the negatives that we were dealing with the last few years.
Yeah, and Shawn, I was talking to a practitioner when the pandemic was just unfolding. So a few months in, and we're doing a lot of content. In fact, you helped us with several, webinars during that time period. And I remember talking to this one vet, and I was saying, look, we have got to figure out better ways to do things moving forward. And I think this is going to make us stronger and more resilient, in the future, right? So, the same thing that you and I are saying today, 2 years later. But what I really also focused on was the fact that it taught us to be a little more mindful about the economics of our clinics, right? I mean, before the pandemic, I think a lot of vets just really didn't scrutinize their charging, and what the markups were and how many discounts were they giving. I think that this forced us to do that. So I'm like you, I still see the positives. I know that we have a lot of challenges ahead, but I definitely think it's good. And speaking of challenges, one of the things that's talked about a lot, and you've talked to us before specifically about this, is student debt. So you mentioned these young vets are graduating and they maybe have to take that first job with a corporate entity because it can help them pay down some of that debt. But talk about, what are some of those strategies that maybe we don't often think about when it comes to managing that student debt?
Yeah, so I think, we get a lot of questions from, mostly newer practitioners who just say, I know that I probably can't get a loan or I can't buy a practice because I have so much student loan debt. And, I think it's really important that, everybody listening understands that that's really just not true. And so one of the things that we know that you needed that degree in order to practice. Okay. So you had to have that. And so there's a lot of also confidence that goes into that because from a lending perspective, if something were to happen, okay, and there were unforeseen circumstances, it didn't go well, and maybe you were unable to keep your clinic going, your independent practice. I also know that your degree is going to afford you the ability to have another job to practice and be able to service that debt. So there's a lot of confidence that goes into the fact that you have that degree. And the last thing that we want to do is penalize veterinarians because of the cost of that. There is a cost associated with it. We all know that higher education is incredibly expensive. So we don't hold that against veterinarians. So when I talk to a potential borrower, what I like to point out is that we want to look at your debt outside of your student loan debt. So one of the things that we say is, I know you want to reward yourself when you get out of school. I've been there. I remember. However, try to keep that in check. If your ultimate goal is ownership, you're going to need a down payment. You want to be sure that you're putting some cash away for your down payment. You want to be sure that you have good credit and that you're servicing all of your current debt. Be sure you're servicing your student loan debt. Don't get a lot of revolving debt, so try to limit your credit card use. You don't need to maybe buy that really expensive car. Maybe you can just replace what you've driven through college and vet school. But make smart decisions like that so that outside of that student loan debt, you look really good as far as a strong, potential borrower.
Right. And again, Vertical Vet Family, one of the reasons why we partner with people like Dr. Flowers and First Financial Bank is because they understand our unique issues and challenges and opportunities than just say your local bank, right? So, I mean, there is a difference. I know we did an entire episode on like choosing that institution for your, if you're going to need to borrow money to start a practice. So again, Schwanda, getting back to that one thing, I speak a lot to students and I often make this joke about, like right now in school, right? You are creating a credit history that could follow you the rest of your life. And I love the fact that you just once again sort of validated, reinforced my caution around like credit card debt, because a lot of students, I think, make some very serious mistakes in vet school in particular or college. And it just carries, carries a lot of weight for years.
You're absolutely right. It takes years to sort of fix a bad credit problem. And I think as young people, I have three kids in college, and a couple more that will be there soon. And so I know that we're teaching these lessons, but I also know that when you're struggling through college and you're trying to make ends meet as maybe a new practitioner, you've worked so hard, you want to reward yourself. I would just suggest just do that wisely. Do not, overspend. Really kind of, keep that in check for the first few years, and you will be shocked at how much money you can pay down on your current debt with on your student loans and how much you can save. And so I tell people all the time, one of the biggest barriers that we see to the first time buyer, so a first time clinic buyer is going to be the down payment. You're going to need 10% down, even on an SBA loan. Conventional loans, it might even be more. So you are going to need to have that cash sort of stocked away in order to do that. And what you don't want to have happen is that you've been out of school a couple of years, you feel like you're ready, you find the perfect opportunity. It's a great match for you as far as maybe the location of the clinic or just the culture of the clinic and the patients that you're seeing, and then you aren't prepared financially to take advantage of that opportunity. That's absolutely the worst thing that can happen. And I hate it when we see that. And so being prepared is the best thing that you can do.
Oh gosh, I just can't. I'm so happy that you said that because when I think even back, Schwanda, when I my first clinic, so I had I bought a clinic, and then when I was going to build my first other clinic, it was 20% down. 20%. And I thought that was a deal, but it required me to think about 5 years in advance, right? I mean, that's literally what I was doing. And this is why, if you go back and read some of my early stuff, Vertical Vet Family, I was always talking about, I always think in 5 and 10 year chunks, right? Because I knew that if I wasn't planning out 3, 5 years, I certainly was not going to achieve any decade long goals. And that leads me to your next point here. What are some, in addition to the student debt issues, which I think we've touched on, and again, we've got an entire webinar on that. And if you want to see more from Schwanda on what you can do specifically, because you're not going to get federal debt relief, Schwanda. Sorry, it's just not going to happen. I'm just going to be the first to break the bad news. But what are some of the other do's and don'ts when it comes to charting that financial freedom pathway?
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point, because one of the biggest things that we say when we talk about some do's and don'ts, and we have seen a lot of things over the last several years, but one of them, we get a question a lot. Oh, when do I start talking to a lender? How when do I start approaching that conversation, or when would I know that I need to decide on a lending institution maybe to partner with? And you saying that you've got to think 5 and 10 years ahead, it's absolutely true. And so what I say is that relationship with your lender is, you can't do that soon enough. If you think that there is a slight possibility that you want to own, you need to start those conversations now. And hopefully you're partnering with a lender who is there to talk you through some of those questions, even if it's 5 years in advance. And so it takes a long time to get things in order, to understand what you're going to need, to gather the information, to find the right opportunity. So what I would say is, don't wait too long to really identify who that financial partner is for you. And it should be somebody that you trust. So that's a huge one, that we see. And I would say the other one is, don't be emotional. This is a business decision. And so emotions, make us do crazy things. And so you've got to really come back every time and recenter yourself and say, okay, is this a good business decision?
Yeah, and there's two things too I want to just add on there, Schwanda, because that is some very good advice if you're watching this today. Number one, it's never too early. You've said this repeatedly on these webinars. Like, look, even if you're thinking maybe 5 years from now, sometime in the future, start talking today, because they're going to give you some ideas of what you need to prepare for, right? The other thing too that I think, Schwanda, is there is a generation, now you and I are Gen X, I think, I certainly am. And we expected this, right? We knew 20% down, all this stuff, but we've now got this sort of instant access to cash. And we had some easy access for the past decade or more, I would argue. And, I think vets sometimes go in there naively thinking, oh, well, I'm just going to press a button on an app and get my loan. And it just doesn't work out like that. I mean, so guys, again, you've got to prepare and plan ahead. The other part of this is emotions. I was just talking to a vet about, 3 or 4 months ago, and she was just completely livid because she went to her bank, and of course they were requiring more than 10% down for her, and just for a variety of reasons. And she was so angry. She took it personally, and I'm just like, trying to talk her down, going, no, this isn't about you. This is about federal banking laws, So maybe give us a little more, I guess, sort of insight into why you shouldn't take this personally, and why when that lender says, okay, this is great, we want to help you, but you're going to have to do this, that, they're just actually following the rules.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So, one of the things that often, borrowers will forget once we start working with them is that this is a business loan and it's not a consumer loan. And so, often the only experience they have would be potentially maybe a real estate loan. So maybe they have a mortgage and they bought a home, or most of the time it's a car, or maybe even in the retail space they bought furniture. It's a consumer loan where you're going to fill out an application. They're going to look at your income and they're going to decide, can you make these payments based on your income. It's different when we're talking about a business loan. That's not the way it works. And so it all hinges on the business. So we are going to have to take a look at the business that you're purchasing. We need to know that it's going to cash flow, which means that it creates enough cash after all the expenses are paid to service the debt. And if that's not possible, it may not be something that we can finance, and potentially it may not be something that you want to purchase.
Yeah, and let me just jump in there too, because Schwanda, guys, rewind this and play that back again, and because it may not be something that you want to. And true story, Schwanda, and I know you get these all the time, where this young veterinarian, she's I guess probably in her second year of ownership now, she has yet to take any salary home. She's barely making the rent. And it's not because the business isn't booming, because it is. She was, by all accounts, she was telling me how busy they were, but it wasn't profitable and she wasn't managing her expenses correctly, in my opinion. So, there's a lot more to this, right, Schwanda, than just getting the loan and owning your own business. I mean, you've got to run it profitably and I would argue smartly.
That's exactly right. You hear the phrase all the time, be sure that you're working on your business, not just in your business. And that's really important as the owner, because you have a new role that you have not had before. So not only are you responsible for taking care of your patients, you're responsible for taking care of your family. So you need to generate revenue and make money in order to support your family, your lifestyle, whatever that is for you. But now you're also responsible for all of your employees as well. And so there's a whole nother level of responsibility there to be sure that you are financially responsible and making good decisions for the business. And that's a new role that most veterinarians have not had before. And we don't teach that in school. There's no time to talk about that in school. And so that it's really important to stop for a minute and think about that I need to pay as much attention to the financials and how my business is doing as I do to the clinical aspects of practice.
Right. And this is why choosing a lender is so important, guys. I mean, because I'm telling you, there are going to be lenders out there that are going to give you money no matter what. Now, the terms may not be as reasonable or fair or whatever else, but you're going to get money, right? But it doesn't mean it's always a smart investment. And I'm telling you, when we partner with people like First Financial Bank and we have Dr. Flowers, they're looking over your shoulder. And I would imagine, Schwanda, there's been more than one occasion in your career at First Financial Bank where you've had to kind of tell that veterinarian, wait a second, I'm not sure if this is the right fit for you.
Absolutely. And it's hard. It is hard because this is a dream quite often. And I don't want to crush anyone's dreams, but what I do want you to do when I'm talking with you, I want you to step back and think about, okay, is this financially a good decision, or am I being emotional? What does cash flow mean? So, your lender should help you walk through what that looks like, because what you don't want to do, and what a lot of new owners don't realize, is that if you don't generate revenue to service debt and to pay your expenses, that money has to come from somewhere. It doesn't miraculously appear. So you've got to think about, then how would I generate more revenue? How do I cut expenses? There's a lot of great information out there from different entities and different groups in order to benchmark financials. And so every industry has financial benchmarking. And I encourage all of my owners to be benchmarking quarterly their profit and loss statements. So how do you compare nationally based on what you're paying your staff, non-DVM and DVMs? How do you compare on all of your expenses? What are the opportunities there to increase revenue? Are we charging enough for our services? So, you need to be looking at all of those things on a regular basis. I cannot tell you how many current owners right now I'm talking to about selling their practice, or I've got a buyer who wants to buy their practice, and they can't even produce financial documents or tax returns. Yeah. And that just should not happen.
Right. Right. And it does. These things infuriate me as a business owner and entrepreneur, and I'm sure they do you. But again, these are just indicative of not that, not even that we're ignorant, but just that we're naive about this stuff. So we can do better. So getting back to these do's and don'ts, of course, the first thing, as you mentioned, the biggest do of all is to plan ahead, start those conversations now, realize you're going to have a down payment, start to look at financials and comparisons and so forth. What are some of the don'ts, though, that you might want to suggest out there to that young vet who's thinking, hey, what are things to avoid?
Absolutely. Don't overpay. One of the things that happens, and it's very closely related to making emotional decisions, is that you are going to want to purchase a practice who either the seller is asking too much, okay, so the price is just too high, or you get into a bidding war with corporate. So don't overpay and do not get into a bidding war with a corporate entity. So corporate entities do not borrow money from banks. They have their own money that they're buying these practices with, and you're not going to win that battle if you're trying to outbid them. Okay, so it's very important that you think about those things, and that's happening. And so when that happens, don't be discouraged. Another opportunity will come up, and you just need to keep looking. And so I think that those are some of the things that we see quite often, is that a first time buyer especially will say, oh, but I'm willing to pay more. I really want this practice. I'm willing to pay more. And again, that's when you should pause. You should have that team around you, your lender, maybe your accountant, your attorney, to stop and say, okay, let's pause. What does that mean if we pay more? What does that look like month to month and on an annual basis if you pay too much for this clinic? When could you then potentially take home a paycheck? Because it could be some time. And so those are some of the things. Do not try to outbid corporate. It's just not going to work. Often they're buying the veterinarians. It's a very specific box that they're looking at when they're purchasing these practices, and you're probably not going to win that bidding war.
Right. And again, I couldn't agree more with all that you just said, Schwanda. And one of the things too, I was talking to a vet last year, and again, she, it's classic. Anytime they tell me from the gate, they're going, I know I probably paid too much. It's like, oh no, I bet you did. But I was trying to explain to her how the $200,000 that she felt she probably paid more than, she was willing to go here and she wound up there. I said, look, unfortunately, that's maybe going to be $1 million more in the long run. And I think that sometimes we lose sight of time and how that works with interest and so forth. Could maybe share a little bit of insight in there about why these little seemingly small differences can add up. And conversely, I'm always trying to say we need to negotiate hard, because if you knock it down $100,000, that might save you $500,000. Who knows, right?
Right, right. So, one of the things that often people aren't aware of is that when a lender is looking at a deal, and we're looking at something called the debt service margin, and the debt service margin is directly related to cash flow. And so, what excess cash is there, at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year, in order to service the debt. And we need to see that we'd like to see 30% extra at least, right? So we want to see that there's extra money there in case we do have to deal with inflation, in case we do have to hire somebody else, in case there is something like another pandemic, and we have to shut down for a few months. So what we don't want to do is say, I have exactly $100 and I need $100 to pay this debt, and that's what I have at the end of the day, because there are so many variables that can change. And so, when you're thinking about that and you're thinking about interest rates rising, this is going to look very different than it did during COVID. We had really low interest rates for a long period of time during the pandemic. We're now sort of, the interest rates are rising. People are really kind of pausing and, what's happening. I think that many individuals have forgotten what interest rates looked like before COVID. I think our COVID brain has done that to us. We've lost sight of what was pre-pandemic. But interest rates are critically important when you're thinking about the difference in a payment with very low interest rates versus rising interest rates, and potentially we're dealing with inflation also right now. So those two things can drastically change the cash flow of your clinic, and then that's compounded over time.
Right. Right. And again, guys, money is still very historically low rates. I mean, I think,
Mhm.
commercial rates are probably going to be in the 7 to 9%. Is that fair, Shawanda, right now
Yeah,
as we're recording
absolutely.
this? But,
Yeah.
but my very first commercial loan, guys, just to put it in perspective, 30 plus years ago was 9.3%. And I thought I was getting a deal because I literally was getting a good deal because we cracked 10% at that time. Shawanda, again, as people sort of look at this and they go, okay, this is a lot of money and figures and facts and all this stuff. What are some of the resources that First Financial Bank offers to help guide you? Because I mean, I think again, if you're watching this today and you're not as maybe economically savvy or financially, astute as you'd like to be, there are resources that can help guide you and accelerate this process. So, what do you guys do to help these young vets, our veterinary professionals, sort of get up to speed on what they need to know?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do hope that, everybody listening will take a few moments and kind of check out our website, because we have a lot of great resources. We have not only some, testimonials, which hopefully is an encouragement, to those that are interested in ownership, but a little nervous about it. But we've got loan calculators. We have a business planning tool and a business planning guide, because often writing a business plan is completely overwhelming, to many people. And so we have a guide, we have a blog with lots of great information, and resources, links to other helpful websites. So we want to be a resource. And I mean this, and I tell people all the time, hopefully the lenders are your biggest resource. That's my goal for my division, is that all of our lenders are the biggest resource that you could possibly have. And so calling us to say, hey, here's what I'm learning, here's, this is a clinic I'm interested in, what do I need, what information should I gather, will you help me look at that? Absolutely. And we may work with somebody for 2 or 3 years before we ever do a loan with them, and we may work with somebody for 2 or 3 years, and then something happens and either we don't do a loan with them, or they do, they get a partner with a community bank very close to where they are. That's okay. We want to be a resource for the industry. And so, we are successful not just because of the loans that we do, but we are successful by supporting veterinary practice and small business ownership. So the blog has some great resources, all of our calculators, business planning tools. We have tons of, a library of other webinars, how to read financial statements. That's a huge one, that it's really tough if you haven't taken those classes. So we've got some webinars out there and other information what is a balance sheet? What am
Right.
I looking for in a P&L? What does that even mean? And so that's what we want to do. We want to be able to provide that education, and be that resource in every aspect of your ownership journey.
And that's why you're our preferred partner. I mean, let's be honest, guys. I mean, Vertical Vet, we are here to try to help you succeed. And First Financial Bank wants to see you succeed, so you pay back their loan. But, this is why we get people together to try to help you. And I will say, definitely check out the website, ffb1.com. Again, it's on the screen as you are watching this. But, if you have any questions, just contact us and we'll get you in touch. The other thing, too, just when it comes to resources, is the fact that, I think that if you're a young veterinarian out there who does have business ownership dreams one day. There are three important people that you need to have in your life now. And I've said this repeatedly, and this certainly helped guide me as a young practitioner. And this is before, I really started owning more clinics and doing more businesses. But the first thing you need to do is you need to have a good relationship with an attorney. And Schwanda, I know neither of us are attorneys, but you really do need someone who can help guide you because these transactions can get complicated and I want to always run things by. So you need to start now with a relationship with some attorney. And I got to tell you, my attorney, Bud Powell, who's passed away now, he was so instrumental in my early successes, right? Because I, could run things by Bud and he'd be like, that's a terrible idea, Ernie, or he was supportive. The second thing you need to do, even though you may not be thinking about today, is to have some financial advisors for investing, right? And even though you're going, well, I can barely pay the rent. Well, you need to start to get people in your life that can give you advice, because even if you're putting away $100 a month, where you put that money and how you use that money can really be important. And then the third is a banking relationship. Like those three things right there, because now that gives me access to equity that I didn't have access to prior to. And, like Schwanda said, I started developing there was I guess Robert Cox back in the day, I had a personal relationship with my lender, and he was just like you, Schwanda, and we didn't have First Financial Bank back then in our area. But what Robert would do was he would say, "Hey, Ernie, here's an opportunity." Like, he started identifying things that I could capitalize on. He also made me aware of changes in tax laws and banking regs and so forth, so I could take advantage. Schwanda, anybody, so I got an attorney, I've got a banker, I've got, a financial investor. What else would you add to that team, to that young vet? Anybody?
The other thing that I would add to that team is probably to do what you can to connect yourself through local and national organizations with owner mentors. And so, many young veterinarians will have clinical mentors and practitioners that they really look up to and have guided the way that, they're able to take care of, their patients. But you need that owner mentor. And so, being able to connect yourself with other owners who then say, this is how I did it. This was my experience. This is what I would do differently, and learn from them and get their advice. And I think that would be the person that I would add to that, because that's critical. Really, and so many owners right now, after COVID, they thought they were ready to
Right.
retire before COVID. Now they're really ready to retire, and they're tired. There are lots of opportunities right now for young veterinarians to get into ownership.
Yep. And again, we've got a lot of these programs, whether it's our peer-to-peer group, the platinum groups, or our Vet IQ group. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, definitely just contact us at Vertical Vet, and we can get you a mentor like this, because I agree wholeheartedly. Those are, and again, we could build out this team, but what Schwan and I are trying to tell you is that get a team around you, right? Because you need to get some good advice. Now, I guess the final thing today, that we want to touch on is, why is ownership, I believe, and I know you do as well, integral to financial freedom? Like, why should vets be thinking about owning a clinic or a business in their future?
Yeah, so I think that ownership is the key to financial freedom. And, I've got several examples, that I've done in multiple talks. And I can take those examples, and I can show you a ton more. But the average DVM owner, so practitioner owner, so practicing and paying yourself in your clinic as one of the DVM practitioners, and then also as the owner, you are commonly, on average, will make 3 times as much money. The average owner, and I think this was probably 2020 or 2021 data, it's about $380,000 is an average DVM owner bring home salary. So when you start thinking about, okay, now I have, I was going to make $95,000, whatever that might be, depending on where you are in the country. And now I have this, a couple $100,000 in some cases excess. So I can reinvest that in my business. I can pay off debt faster. I can start investing in myself. And I love what you said as far as you need that financial advisor, because the first thing you should be doing, even if you can barely pay the rent, you've got to be paying yourself. Pay yourself first and put that money into investments, so that you have that. And so, I think that that's really critical. But you are going to have a fixed income, basically, if you're working for a corporate entity or for another, DVM owner. You have the potential as an owner to absolutely dictate what you bring home at the end of the year, because you are going to be the one responsible for being more efficient, increasing services, making sure that prices are right, making sure that you're not, your expenses are not too high. Those are the things that help you, really gain financial freedom. And then ultimately, what I love to see is when we have owners who own more than one practice, because that just compounds your ability to have more financial freedom, continue reinvesting in, opportunities, business opportunities, ownership opportunities, throughout the years. And so, I think that's what we find. But you would be shocked at the difference in that DVM salary versus the average owner DVM salary.
Right, Right. And again, guys, I will tell you, there are many, many ways to get to financial freedom. This is certainly one. It's the one that I'm familiar with and I benefited from. And I think the one that Schwanda also, certainly we lean into. But, again, everybody's got their own style and personality traits and desires. So, I will say this, that accompanying that increase in owner DVM salary also is more work and a little more pressure. And, it's if it fits, it's great. I do also sometimes worry though, Schwanda, and I know that you've probably counseled many just like I have, that you do see people that just aren't ready yet and they need a little more practice, if you will, a little more maturity. And so don't rush this either, because that can also set you up. So and again, guys, this is one of those areas where it's very nuanced, it's very individualized, but we want to tell you that if you are interested and you're ready to take on ownership as a pathway to financial freedom, then we're here to help you at Vertical Vet. And of course, we're going to do that by leveraging relationships with people like First Financial Bank. Schwanda, any closing bits of advice, to that person who's out there, they're going, I really do want to do this. I don't know when, I don't know exactly how to start, but what's that last bit of advice? Like if you just, had to give them that elevator pitch, what would you tell that young vet right now who's saying, I'm kind of, maybe, sort of, I'm not sure?
Yeah, so I think just like anything, my advice would be, as you said, there are a lot of veterinarians, who are going to listen to this, or who are out there practicing, and they're going to say, I don't want any part of that. That is not my desire, and that is perfectly fine, and that's great. However, very self-aware. However, if you have the tiny little, just the tiniest little thought that I really would like to be an owner. I have this professional desire to not only practice but also to own. I would say to those individuals, do not ignore that. So don't ignore that desire. Start figuring out how to do some research. And the biggest thing that you need to do, because you probably don't have a lot of financial training or education, seek out some of those programs. Start learning about financial documents. What does that mean? Let me doing some, there's all kinds of free webinars, free classes, things out there that you can do to increase your knowledge and your confidence in ownership and, in business in general. That would be the first thing that I would do to anybody who has that tiny little inkling of, interest in ownership. And then I would say, begin to assemble that team of partners that you trust. Those people that they are there to support you. They have your best interests at heart. They may have to give you a hard answer. They may have to say, this is either a no or it's definitely a not yet. And those are hard conversations, but you need those people, on your side, working with you, that will give you honest, true, trustworthy feedback and advice.
Yeah, and honestly, guys, that's why we want to have you in front of our membership, because I need people like Dr. Schwanda Flowers out there telling veterinarians, hey, here's what I learned from the pharmacy world. Here's how you can make it better in the veterinary profession, and they're doing it. And so again, I can't thank you enough, Dr. Flowers, for joining us today. I can't thank First Financial Bank for providing all these resources. And again, guys, this stuff is free. Just go to ffb1.com, and just start to click around and drive around. And a lot of you I get a lot of questions. I'm sure you do, Schwanda, saying, I don't know how to do a business plan. Well, they've got a template that actually just, you start filling in the blanks, and, and you're going to need to do a little more work than just fill in the blanks. But, Schwanda, you guys give them those resources to help them take that next step. I love that.
Yep, we do. We have examples. We will share, different examples based on maybe what type of practice you're interested in, where you are in the country. We have a ton of resources. The website's the great place to start. But then after that, the lender that you're working with, us at First Financial Bank, will continue to be that resource. And we love to share. We love to share anything that we have, knowledge that we have, experience that we've gained, because it's only going to make the industry better.
Gosh, thank you so much, Dr. Flowers, for spending time with us today and sharing your knowledge and expertise.
Thank you.
Well, guys, that is it for another edition of the Business Academy. I got to tell you, these things, every time we do them, I just get more excited about the future of our profession. And with people like First Financial Bank, businesses, partners like First Financial Bank, and people like Dr. Schwanda Flowers, I mean, you can see why that enthusiasm grows every year. And again, if you're having questions and you need to just bounce some stuff off, whether you're an associate, a new owner, or whatever, a student, why don't you reach out to us at VerticalVet? I mean, we want to talk to you about these things because we know that by establishing those relationships early in your career, you're going to have a much better, more successful outcome. So again, on behalf of the entire amazing team at VerticalVet, I am Chief Veterinary Officer Dr. Ernie Ward. It's been my pleasure to bring you this special edition of the Business Academy. We'll talk to you soon. Good luck out there. Do good. Bye.